Thank you for tuning in to another episode of G.E.N Talks podcast, where the goal is to empower the youth of Glendale, connect youth to community resources, individuals, and organizations through interviews and discussion. I'm your host, Melissa.
And I'm Desiree, and we had the pleasure of talking to Tracy Badua. Tracy is a Filipino-American author of books about young people with sunny hearts in a sometimes stormy world. By day, she is an attorney who works in national housing policy and programs, and by night, she squeezes in writing, family, and pup time, and bites of her secret candy stash. We hope you enjoy the interview.
Everyone, I'm Tracy Badua. I am the author of Freddy versus the Family Curse, a contemporary fantasy middle grade that came out in May of this year. And then I've got a young adult novel coming out in January. It's called This Is Not a Personal Statement. So I've been a little bit busy trying to juggle the two different books with two different age ranges.
So thank you, Tracy, for introducing yourself and taking your time out of the day to talk with us. We have a lot to discuss.
Thanks. Let's go ahead and dive in. I'm so excited to talk to you guys.
Yay. So to start off the interview, in your bio, you mentioned how by day you are an attorney and you work in national housing policy and programs. What made you want to pursue becoming an attorney and work specifically in, those avenues?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I feel like for a lot of kind of, first generation, second generation families in the US, it's like, I want to be a writer, I want to be creative. And they're like, lawyer, doctor. And I was like, no, I want to write books. And my mom was like, lawyer, got it. So like, I feel like I got, not that I, don't love being a lawyer. Like I absolutely love what I do. I get to work on all sorts of cool programs, and, housing is such a dynamic, like big issue. So I love that. But it's interesting that I was really into like the research and writing part of it, and it kind of got channeled into that. And on the housing part, law is one thing, but there's so many different fields when you get into law. And my mom's like a realtor, so it's kind of like it's funny that I say it now because I'm like, wow, she has been steering me like all these years. It's good, like I'm employed, but I'm like, oh wow, I totally got played over the course of like decades.
So besides being an attorney, you are also an author. How were books introduced into your life?
So going, again, all the way back to when I was like a bright-eyed kid, and I was like, I want to be a writer. My parents are fantastic. They definitely encouraged reading and took me to our local library like every week. Like I had my own library card. I would just get as many books as I could. We started going to a different library because I like exhausted all the ones I wanted to read from the one closest to our house. So I was always a big reader growing up. And it kind of wasn't until like lately, I want to say, obviously the last couple of years, that I was like, I think I could do this. I could turn reading into writing, and it took a lot of work on my end, but I'm glad that I could kind of turn something that I love into something else that I love. So that was kind of fun.
And in your early writing journey, do you remember what some of those first short stories you wrote were about?
Oh no. If we're gonna go all the way back to when I was a kid, like I literally had stories of like, this stuffed animal is gonna go get a haircut. What haircut should he get? And then I had like these really awful drawings of like a bear with like a bowl cut, and then like a bear with a mullet. So it's like you got like choose your own adventure kind. I definitely remember one where it was, they all featured my stuffed animals because like that was my social world when I was a kid, is like all of my stuffed animals are going to feature prominently in my books. So I definitely had one where a couple of stuffed animals were having like a dance competition, and that was like my hard hitting, like riveting, like will they succeed, will they not, kind of like, it was terrible. But my grandmother has all of them, and like she keeps them, and she always likes to show them to me. So those are kind of the really early like way back when. But more recently, when I started getting into trying to write with the goal of publication, I started doing this when like the dystopia was a big thing, like in YA. So like, of course, I feel like anyone who started writing at that time has like a really terrible dystopian book that's just like locked in their computer and will never open again. So like I have one of those and it will never see the light of day. Like I should delete it just in case like I ever lose my laptop and someone unearths it. But like we all have, you know, that I did some like everything that they say like not to do. Like he definitely the character, like the book starts with the character like waking up in the morning and like looking in the mirror and then like no one understands me and like only I can save the kingdom. Like it's so terrible. But you know, knock on wood, I hopefully got better since then.
So I think you touched a little bit about this, but what made you actually take that leap into the publishing author world?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've always been a big reader, and I did want publication has always been that kind of far off dream. You know, it's like it would be so cool to write a book, and it's something that I toyed with for a really long time, and it actually it's something you kind of don't undertake lightly. It takes a lot of work to kind of know how to write in this industry. It's not so much as like writing a story. There's a lot of different structures you have to deal with. There's like a certain way of doing things. Like I had to learn what the word query meant. Like they're like little things you kind of have to learn on the way. So it took a lot of kind of research and sitting down and figuring it out on my end. But it's, you know, it's been really rewarding to kind of turn a hobby into something like I always thought it was going to be a hobby, and to turn it into like a published book has been a total dream.
And has being an attorney in any way helped you or prepared you kind of to be in this new world in a way?
I like to think it would, because so I work for a government agency, and a lot of what we do is taking really, really big concepts and trying to make them as simple as possible. So I was like, okay, so if that's a skill that I've like developed over all these years, like maybe I can try to write try to write fiction where I'm trying to take all these big ideas and trying to, you know, say them simply. And what's been cool is that I have taken that skill that I've honed in middle grade and turned it around and like made my life easier at my job, where like everyone's like, gosh, we've got this 30-page document and it's so complicated, like give it to Tracy. I'm like, I got it, guys. I can write for ages 8 and up, you know, send it my way.
I love that.
Can you talk a little bit more about your novel Freddy versus the Family Curse and the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, so Freddy versus the Family Curse, like I said, it's a contemporary fantasy middle grade novel, and it's about a 12-year-old boy, Freddy. You know, I've got like my book here, that's him. It's about Freddy, who has to team up with the World War II era ghost of his great grandfather to break a terrible family curse. And if he doesn't, he gets trapped in an amulet forever. So there's a lot of, you know, bad luck and Filipino superstition and, you know, little bits of folklore and some history in there. And I'd like to think humor. I tried to make it funny. I never know if it lands. I've heard people have laughed here and there and like, oh, that's all I can ask for. You never know if you're funny in print. Like you never know.
Right. And what was that writing process like for you?
So, you know, kind of, I realize now that I didn't go all the way back to, you know, the beginning of your question before, of the writing process on that. Like in 2017 was when I got the idea of, it was literally like I have a notebook somewhere that says, kid returns World War II era thing to someone. Like it's like the worst note, but it was that little bit of an idea when I was watching, it was a Congressional Gold Medal award ceremony for Filipino World War II veterans. So I was watching it and like, okay, like maybe I can kind of turn like have a book kind of touch on this. And then I put it away for a couple of years because it kind of took that long. Like I had that line and I was like, I don't know what to do with this. So, you know, closed that notebook and kind of went on my way. And then in about 2019 was like, again, it's about a year, 2 years later of just like having the idea kind of work around in my brain of like, all right, so if somebody's going to return something like World War II is a long time ago, like how would that work? Like maybe I should have a ghost. And like what would he return? Like maybe it should be an amulet. And like there's, you know, little things that kind of seep into your brain over the years. So it wasn't until 2019 that I finally had enough of an idea, like enough of an outline to start writing it. So 2019 was when I just kind of shot out that draft and like ran it by a bunch of critique partners. You know, it took me a while to get it in front of my current agent, and we kind of went from there. But 2017, like I feel like it is so long ago. I just noticed like what year it is. So it was so long ago, and it's like finally, this past May I got to hold the book in my hand, so that's really cool.
And in the book, you talk about the involvement and contribution of those from the Philippines as they fought alongside the Americans against invading forces of Imperial Japan. And I think it's amazing that, yes, it's a fun novel for anyone to read, but you also put in facts that maybe many readers might not know. So how did you do your research for this book? I know you talked about it a bit, but.
Yeah, with this, so there is actually a lot of kind of personal family history woven into the book. So part of what I wanted to do, I'm that terrible auntie that's always like trying to make the nephews and like nieces learn. Like I'm always like, here's some books and like here's an educational toy for Christmas. So like I'm that terrible person. But like I figured if I was going to write this fun middle grade book, let me try to sneak some learning into there. But that also means I kind of have a duty to get it right. So in addition to kind of talking to my grandmother and then some of my older aunties who remembered like kind of the aftermath of World War II, like I also did some extra research on my own. I reached out to a couple organizations like the Philippine Scouts Association. There's like the Filipino veterans organizations online. So I did some extra research on my own because I figured, again, if this is going to be a little piece of info that not a lot of folks learn about in schools, I want to at least make sure it's as accurate as possible. So that's kind of where I went with that. And I kept going back to my grandma and being like, what else about this? Like, what other details can you tell me? And like, she loves it because she gets to, hang out and chat, and like, we have chocolate in our house. So she's like, yeah, let's talk.
Did you ever feel like an underlying pressure to represent your history and culture, especially when there aren't that many Filipino authors in the mainstream media?
I wouldn't really say it's pressure. With this story, I wrote it because I wanted it to be this kind of story. And I have to say, I mentioned that I do have a couple other books coming out. So some of those touch on what it's like to be, a Filipino American. And then there's one that I'm working on with my editor right now that's not at all like, I guess, culture based, if that makes sense. It's serious. It's about some friends who go to like a Coachella style music festival. So there's not really like, oh, my experience as a Filipino American at Coachella. Like it's not that. It's just like chaos. So, it wasn't really pressure, but I was like, this is the kind of story that I wanted to tell. And if I'm going to tell a story about a family curse, I want it to be grounded in things that I know. And for better or for worse, things that I know are like the wild superstition and folklore of my family of like, hey, don't go to sleep with your hair wet, don't sweep at night, don't sing at night. Like there were so many like little things that I was like, I'm going to sneak some of these into the book and see how mad they get at me. They're not that mad. My mom was like excited. She was like, oh, they were like little Easter eggs for her. She's like, oh, I told you that one. I was like, yeah.
And your second book is coming out next year. It's called This Is Not a Personal Statement. Can you talk a bit more about the book and the inspiration?
Yeah, I'm, super excited about this one. And like I said, so I actually have the physical arcs with me. So This Is Not a Personal Statement is about a girl who is like the best at everything. She's like got really good grades. She's at a really competitive high school, and she is all set to go to, her dream college. And turns out she doesn't get in. So of course, what she does is just essentially the entire book is like a fake it till you make it kind of thing. So she breaks into dorm rooms, she attends classes, she, kind of dodges security, lies to her family because of course they're not going to want her to pretend that she got into a school. And it's all with this goal of she's going to reapply for the spring semester and get in, and nobody will know. No one will know that she didn't get in. So, but the fun part of writing fiction is that you get take, your premise, and then you literally make it as bad for the character as you can. You're like, all right, she's going to do this. And I was like, what can I do? How can I make this stressful? So I have been told this is an incredibly stressful book to read, but it was a ton of fun to write. And it kind of came from the idea that, you know, it's wild. It's based, even based, it's very loosely inspired by the fact that apparently a lot of people do this. Like, as I was kind of doing research, you know, a quick Google search was like, there's a lot of folks who pretended to go to these different colleges and then were like caught by security like 2 years in. It's like, how did you do this for 2 years?
Yeah.
Like, that's really unsafe, but like, good job, I guess. So there's been quite a few folks, and you know, when you really think about it, like, how many times have people just, you know, kind of fudge the truth a little bit just to just like, you know, so somebody will be proud of them, or so that they don't have to admit that they didn't do something that they were supposed to or that they wanted to do. So like I have an author's note at the beginning of the physical art that I have, and it talks about, you know, how many times have you been on the phone with your parents and you're like, oh yeah, you know, I'm on my way home, and like you haven't even gotten in the car yet, like you're still at your friend's house, but you're like, I'm almost there, I just like, there's all these red lights, like I'll be there in a minute. So it's like little things like that times 1,000. So that's what this book is.
I love the cover of your new book. How did you choose a cover of the books, and what did that process look like?
So what's really cool about this cover is that I got to work with a Filipino American artist who actually, you know, drew everything. I am not creative enough, so I'm not the person who comes up with a cover design, but what the Quiltree Books team does is they ask me, you know, are there any covers you really, really love? Are there any that you're just like, no, I really don't want to go this direction. I don't want photographs. I want something drawn. I want, you know, a person on it versus, you know, some like random colors. Like you kind of have some input, and then you just kind of have to let go and see what they come up with. And I was so happy that they came up with this concept. And like the very, very minor things that I added is like, she has like a boba cup. Like that was like my feedback. I was like, can she have a boba somewhere in this? They're like, I don't know where we're gonna put it. We could try to balance it on top of this stack of books. So they did it, and I'm like, excellent. I was really happy with that decision. But that's as much as like the creative input that I got into it. I'm so happy with how it looks.
And if you have any writer's block or are not feeling creative, what are some things that you do to help you get through that?
Gosh, I try to take breaks, or like I say take breaks to purposefully like watch TV and like read some other books, or just like, you know, go out and talk to people. I feel like a lot of the times that I'm stuck on something, if I'm talking to like my friends or like my critique partners, like something might just click. Like the longer that I sit alone in my head, like the worse it gets. You know, like the writer's block gets worse because you're just sitting there being like, this won't work. Like, what about this idea? Like, oh, that's terrible. But when you're talking to people, it's really easy. It's a little easier to be like, okay, I could see how that could work. I could see how this, you know, maybe the character would do this or they wouldn't do this. Like, for example, I mentioned this like chaotic Coachella festival kind of book that I'm working on. And like, that was a fun one to get input from friends on, because like everyone's got those like really terrible stories of like, you know, when we tried to go to this party and then somebody, you know, like got really sick to their stomach, or somebody, you know, lost their cell phone. There's always like those little bits of like, oh, I could use this. And it's awful. But like talking to people really helps to get those little like gears going. But again, it's all about, for me, for writers, if I have writer's block and I'm stuck, it's stepping away from the writing and like getting out of my head a little bit, if that makes sense.
What is some advice that you would give a teen or anyone who wants to become an author?
I think one thing I want to mention, like, and it was, our whole conversation has been about this, but like I obviously did really want to be a writer, and then that turned into like becoming a lawyer, and then kind of coming back to writing. So I think what I want to let people know is that like, it's all right if it doesn't happen when you want it to. Like, you can always come back to it later. You will always have that skill and you'll always have that love. So like, if for some reason you're like, you know what, let me try my hand at being, you know, a veterinarian, or I want to try something completely different. Like, if you love, you know, reading and you continue to read and write, like you can always come back to it. And there's a ton of folks. We have a 22 debuts class. It's basically like folks who have their first novel coming out this year. And there's folks of all sorts of different age ranges of like, they just came out of college, they're still in college, to like, they just came out with an article, I think in Publishers Weekly, where it's a couple of our fellow debuts are like over the age of 50. So it's, you can always come back to it. Like, don't stress out about being like the top 20 under 20 or the top 30 under 30. Like, when you have a good idea and you're ready to work on it, like it'll be better. Like, it'll work out.
And how did you find your voice in writing, and how did you hone your craft?
This was tough because writing on the legal side is so dry and terrible, and you don't use exclamation points and you don't use adjectives or adverbs, and every sentence is like a paragraph long. So it really was, the advice that everybody circulates is to read widely, especially in kind of what you want to write. So especially going to middle grade, that was tough because, I had to really read a ton of middle grade books, which weren't something that I like would kind of pick up on my own, like before I started writing middle grade. So I had to really purposefully seek out some really good middle grade books and kind of analyze like, all right, so these are how short the sentences are. This is how, how fast they get into the action. This is how deep they get into their own thoughts versus, young adults. So there was a lot of analysis that kind of came down to like what does and doesn't work for each age range. And then the voice part is just, as you can tell, as I'm talking, like, this is just what I sound like. And it kind of translates like right into the book, where it's pretty informal. I don't use a lot of big words. There's a tendency to ramble, but that's what I have like really good editors for. So that's kind of what it was. It is just that same read widely advice that you hear everywhere. It's true. That's why we all keep repeating it, because like it's so true.
So whenever someone picks up your books, what would you like for them to say or feel once they read them?
I will. So first of all, I would like to kind of separate the age ranges here. If you're picking up, Freddy versus the Family Curse, I would love you to think like, oh, that's a really good, uplifting story. And just like to have that feel good kind of thing coming out of it. Now, if you're picking up this guy, if you leave this being like stress out and like, oh my gosh, I would never do that, or would I? Like the kind of questioning / secondary stress, like if I can make you feel something with a young adult book, like I feel like I'm doing my job.
And what have you learned so far throughout this whole journey as an author?
The importance of being able to take a no. And I'm sure, if you've got folks that have been pursuing publication, and you guys obviously talk to authors all the time about like how hard it is to break into the industry of, you have to not only write the book, but you have to get like agents to like it. You have to get editors to like it. You have to get readers to like it. So there's going to be no's at every turn. Like there's always going to be rejection. So like just get comfortable with it. is my recommendation, because it's, it's not anything ever personal. Reading is so subjective. Like there's so many books that like my critique partners absolutely love and recommend that I was like, I really don't love, like I'm not in the mood for, fairies right now, or I'm not in the mood for this right now. Like it has nothing to do with how fantastic that book is. It's just like, it's not in my taste at the current moment. So just recognizing that a no could be a no for all sorts of different reasons. And that doesn't mean like, no, stop trying. So that's kind of one of the things that I've had to drill into my mind time and time again.
To you, what does all this mean to you, especially being a Filipino story writer and being able to be a voice in middle grade and YA literature and make the Filipino community be seen?
It is such an honor to be able to put out books that kind of authentically reflect the kind of stories that I grew up with, because it's such a specific thing, because it's not just like Filipino, and like it's not exactly kind of the traditional story that you have seen out in middle grade over the years. It's very Filipino American. It's very niche. So the fact that I was able to put out a book with these little things, like I said, the Easter eggs that my mom was so excited about, of like little things where like characters have these random nicknames. Like that's something that's very true in my family. Like Freddie's cousin is named Charlene and they just call her Sharky. I have cousins that we call something completely different than what they're named, just because at some point, like someone decided that your name is going to be this. So little things like that. It's so cool to be able to put out a story that maybe somewhere like a young reader is going to look at it and be like, oh, okay, cool. Like we kind of do that too. And recognize that it's just like, it's part of the experience. It's not anything like weird or exotic. It's just like, no, this is one aspect of one person's experience, and you pick up another book and this is another experience. Like that's the cool part about books, is that you can step into other people's shoes. So I'm excited to be one of the folks that is putting Filipino American shoes out into there for readers.
Now, before we end, we have some rapid fire questions to ask. The first question is, what is your favorite color?
Favorite color is blue.
When are you the happiest?
This is a terrible answer. It's when there's like dessert, like when I'm somewhere and they have dessert. That is when I'm at my happiest.
If you could have 3 people dead or alive for dinner, who would it be?
Oh, this one's tough. I would definitely, one of my grandmothers passed away, like, way back when. I think it'd be really cool to have dinner with her and just be like, hey, this is what I've been up to. Like, this is what everyone else in our family's been up to too. And kind of get her take on it. I think that would be really, really fun. And this is, aspirational, but like the Obamas, I think would be really cool. Like, former President Obama is like a big reader. Like he has his book list everywhere. So I feel like that would be really fun. And they're just like, they're really cool. So I feel like that would be a fun, maybe separate dinners. I don't know what my grandmother and like the Obamas, like, I don't know what that kind of dinner would look like, but those would be cool.
What is a song that you have on repeat currently?
I am on a big Olivia Rodrigo kick right now. So, I have it on Spotify. So literally like the first song is like Brutal and it just plays and plays and plays. But it's a fun song. It's good. It's nice and angsty. I like it.
What is a book that you have recently read or currently reading that you would recommend?
A book that I'm currently reading is a middle grade by Kiersten White. It is the first in her Wretched Waterpark series. So it's like it's kind of perfect going into spooky season because it's like a really kind of messed up spooky water park, and I'm only about a third of the way through it, but I'm really enjoying it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tracy. We learned a lot about you. Thank you for taking your time out of your day to sit down with us and talk. Can you let everyone at home know about any upcoming projects and where they could connect with you?
Yeah, so I mentioned that I do have This Is Not a Personal Statement coming out in January 17, 2023. And then I just the other day announced a middle grade in May, so May 9th, 2023. It's called The Takeout. It's got a Filipino Indian fusion food truck and some evil twin celebrity chefs that are kind of like foodie property brothers. So I've got that coming out next May. And then obviously, like I've kind of given you all a sneak peek into that chaotic music festival book that we don't have a date for because I'm still like actively revising it. So I've got a lot of fun stuff coming up. And if you'd like to learn more about my books, I do have a website. It's tracybadua.com. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. It's usually Tracy B. Writes or Tracy Badua Writes. So just look me up.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much. We really, truly enjoyed having you. And thank you for doing this again.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Did you enjoy this episode? I'm sure you did. Don't forget to follow us on our socials on both Facebook and Instagram at MyGlendaleLAC.
And follow us on Spotify and Apple or anywhere where you get your podcasts from at G.E.N Talks. Also, make sure to give us a like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, Glendale Library Arts and Culture, where we post a full episode video version every Friday at 4:30 p.m.